is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. A major police operation in England. 2 university students among 3 people killed in Nottingham in a knife and van attack. Police arrest a man on suspicion of murder.
Our other headlines: former US President Donald Trump to appear in court charged with keeping White House documents relating to nuclear, military and intelligence secrets.
Inflation in the United States, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, falls to 4%. We'll be in New York to find out what it means for the wider economy.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas begins his visit to China as Beijing seeks a larger role in Middle East diplomacy.
And gone. A rare 12th century Chinese Buddha goes under the hammer in Paris. British police say a man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after 3 people died in what they're calling a major incident in Nottingham city centre.
Another 3 people were injured in a separate attack where a van attempted to drive into them. The police believe the incidents are linked. Several roads have been closed in the city and public transport services suspended. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Yolo Abdavid, who's in Nottingham. Yolo, more details emerging now of the people who died.
Yes, it's been confirmed that 2 of the 3 people who have died are students at the University of Nottingham, one of 2 universities in this city with a population of 50,000 students. Well, it's been confirmed that 2 of them were amongst the 3 that have died. And the police are interrogating one suspect, a 31-year-old man who's been arrested. That happened quite quickly this morning. The police were first called at 4 a.m. this morning, and then there were other incidents at 5:30 a.m. And since then, this street and several other streets in the centre of Nottingham have been closed and remain closed for now. This is Milton Street, where the attempted hit and run happened. And this street, as well as the main focus of where the students were, Ilkeston Street, in another part of Nottingham, that also remains closed. So we do now know more about the direction of the investigation by the police. And I think it does seem that while people are shocked, of course, the police themselves are saying that this is out of character in terms of Nottingham, and they are quite shocked at this kind of incident, the gravity of this kind of incident. And of course there are many different elements to the police investigation. But now that we know that 2 of the people who've died are students, and of course quite quickly this morning they have a man in custody.
Do you get any sense of an indication of a motive?
Plenty of speculation. I think the fact that counter-terrorism police were here, the fact that there was a unit of the police that liaised between counter-terrorism and national police and local police here. Clear motive here in terms of the terror attacks that we have seen in other British cities, probably more than any, London. We're not getting that sense, but the police, they will talk and they will have more information in the next half hour to an hour, we're told. But maybe then we'll know more about the direction and how they're investigating. But I think it's worth noting, Jamie, that the roads which they've closed off, especially Ilkeston Road, where the students were found and where they were attacked, have been forensic officers there. They've bagged clothes and any other information that they can find for forensic detail. So that's why they've been quite tight-lipped most of the day.
It needs to be stressed that this is a very unusual incident in any city across the UK. What have people there been saying?
I think we felt it was quiet in Nottingham when we arrived. It doesn't feel quiet now. People are going about their business, and of course people are talking about it. Of course they're aware of it. Of course they understand that these streets are closed. But I don't get a sense of people are feeling afraid. I don't get a sense that people are wondering if they are safe on the streets. It doesn't feel like people are considering this as a terror attack. So maybe there's something else behind it. But of course, people do react in different ways. And here's the views of some people we've spoken to today.
Nottingham's just such a wonderful city. And it's, you know, it's always got a great vibe about it. You always feel really safe on the streets. And, yeah, it's just foreign to us in all sorts of ways, really.
He went straight in to these two people. The woman went on the curb. The man went up in the air. It was such a bang. I wish I never saw it, because it's really shaken me up.
So at the moment, the police are keeping an open mind. They're not looking for anybody else in connection with this investigation at the moment, and we're likely to have more details pretty soon.
With that, our correspondent Yolo Abdavid in Nottingham.
Donald Trump will appear in court in coming hours, the first former US president to face federal criminal charges. He's accused of unlawfully retaining top-secret papers after leaving office and lying to officials who tried to recover them. Over 100 documents with classified markings were found at Trump's Florida estate in August. Some were nuclear, military and intelligence briefings, including on foreign countries. The former president has denied wrongdoing. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Benji Hire, who's in Miami for us. Benji, what's expected to happen in court today?
Well, there's a flurry of activity in the streets below me. Media, protesters, police gathering with just a few hours ago until Donald Trump is arraigned in the federal courthouse here. His second arraignment in just over 2 months. This one on a number of charges relating to those 11,000 documents that he's alleged to have taken from the White House, dozens of which were deemed classified, some top secrets that he allegedly showed to those who did not have security clearance, and attempted to hide them from investigators, thereby potentially obstructing justice. It's in that courtroom where he will hear the indictment in full, where those counts will be laid out, and where he'll be able to enter a plea. Given he's been protesting his innocence in past days, it's likely he will plead not guilty. He's then returning to Bedminster, his estate in New Jersey, where he'll be delivering an address, an attempt to inspire his supporters, given he is, ultimately, still in that fight for the presidency.
And how's this case going to affect that fight for the presidency, his attempt to return to the White House?
It's remarkable, isn't it? Because you think that most contenders would find this sort of evidence against them damning, especially if found guilty. But Donald Trump has been able to ride the wave, in effect. During his previous indictment in New York just a few months back, he was actually able to rise in Republican polls, fundraise millions of dollars. And on this occasion, his Republican rivals have called the indictment, have sided, I should say, with Donald Trump in condemning the indictment. That is going to provide significant fuel for him, but ultimately it's still down to the fine details as to when the trial might be, before the election, after the election, what sort of jurors will be on that trial as well, whether they'll be favourable towards the former president in a state which voted heavily in favour of him. And then I think, really, after all of that, his fate very well might rest in the court of public opinion. Even if convicted, Donald Trump has promised not to stand down from that race, to still try in his bid for the White House, and then it'll be up to voters to decide whether they still want him as president.
Certainly will, Benji Hire. Thank you very much.
Ukraine says at least 10 people have been killed and dozens of others injured after a Russian missile attack on the city of Kryvyi.
The strikes hit several civilian buildings in the city, which is the hometown of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Rescuers are continuing to search through the rubble for survivors.
Well, Ukraine has asked Australia to supply more details about the condition of 41 F-18 fighter jets stored at a Sydney airbase. Kyiv is reportedly eyeing a potential weapons transfer that could significantly boost its air power. Ukraine recently won the United States' approval to acquire American-made aircraft.
Russia says it's repelled Ukrainian attacks in the Donetsk region. The country's defence ministry also released video of what it says is a captured German-made Leopard tank filmed in southern Ukraine. Meanwhile, a pro-Russian military blogger says a top Russian general has been killed after a Ukrainian missile strike in the Zaporizhzhia region.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why electric cars from China might be taking up more of the roads in Europe in the coming years.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann. Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Now, annual inflation in the United States has fallen to its lowest level in more than 2 months, 2 years.
Both the, yes, 2 years, something like that. Anyway, both the Consumer Price Index and core CPI, which doesn't include things like food and energy costs, dropped to 4% in May. Our correspondent John Terrett is watching events for us in New York. Well, what's the background to the CPI data then?
Well, I tell you, it came in a lot better than anybody expected, I think. Yes, and I tell you, CPI is now #1 with a bullet. It is the single most important piece of economic data in the world, anywhere, ever. Now, it used to be jobs, but it ain't anymore since COVID came along and since we had this inflation kick in about 18 months ago. Now, anybody who is anybody in the economic sphere only really cares about CPI. And we had it out about 4 hours ago, and there was an 11th monthly decline, so that's very good. Came in cooler than expected, so that's very good as well. And here are the actual numbers. I'll keep them as simple as possible for you. I've got loads of notes here, but in the very simplest terms, in May, US inflation in the month from April to May was up 0.1%. We thought it might be 0.2%, so that's good, that's better. Year on year, we're up to 4%, so down, as it were, because a year ago we were at 9.1, now we're at 4%, down from 4.9% in April, 1 month decline. That's good too. However, if you strip out food and energy, they're gone. Goodbye food and energy. That gives you the rump of it all, and that's not quite so good. It was up 0.4%, which I'm pretty sure is more or less where we thought it would be, and the annual amount certainly is at 5.3%. But that tells you that there's still real pressure on the consumer at the moment because of that core figure. Shelter was the main reason for this inflation being so stubborn. So that's really things like rent. Now, what does it all mean? Well, it means that the Federal Reserve, which began its meeting almost exactly at the same time as these figures came out, doesn't really have to worry too much. Whatever they were thinking going into this meeting, which starts today, they have a nice lunch, then they come back this afternoon, then they go to a hotel, they come back tomorrow, they make a decision at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Whatever they're kind of thinking when they went into that meeting, they don't need to fret too much, because this is a pretty, what they call Goldilocks report. It's a sweet spot report. And Wall Street, as I told you yesterday, is fairly optimistic that the Federal Reserve will pause tomorrow at 18 hours GMT when they make their announcement. And the theory is that they can always raise again in July if they want to. So we've had 14 months of interest rates going up to combat 40-year high inflation. Everybody here believes there will be a pause tomorrow, but if things go to the wall, then they can always come back in July. They meet on the, I think it's the, I can't remember now, actually. I think it might be the 25th and 26th of July, and they could raise then if they still need to. Anyway, the markets took off, and the Treasuries extended their gains as well, and right now the Dow is up 122 points, Nasdaq 75, and the S&P 524, and that's a lot more than they've been up in the futures markets before the news came out. Juliet and Jamie.
John, there's some box office entertainment to be had for those of us who are politics and economics bores. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen facing a bit of a grilling.
Yes, Yellen is facing a grilling over on Capitol Hill, and the reason is that the House Financial Services Committee, they ask her to come every year and discuss things like international trade and so on, and this was postponed from a week ago, and now she's there. And it does happen every year, it's true to say, but, you see, the House Financial Services is controlled by Republicans now, and the Republicans are very keen to say to her, well, how come you're the Treasury Secretary, right? You are. She says, yes, I am. How is it you didn't know when the country was going to run out of money? Because you said the 1st of June, and then you changed it to the 5th of June. Did you not know when the country's going to run out of money? And she's been saying, well, look, you know, it's very difficult, it's hard to predict these things, you never quite know. She has noted that she's very relieved that the debt ceiling crisis went away, that they did come to that 11th hour agreement in the end. But she also noted that Moody's, which is one of the credit rating agencies, is still minded to downgrade the American credit rating because it was very unimpressed with the fact that the debt ceiling issue happened at all. It was, says Moody's, and a lot of people agree with this, basically a manufactured crisis because it didn't need to happen because they raise the debt ceiling all the time. But when there's political expediency, they argue about it, which is what happened this time round. Now, she is also calling for more money for developing nations to counter China Belt and Road and to help countries who've taken money from China and now find themselves in some difficulty paying it back. She says the IMF and the World Bank are a counterweight to rising China. And in summary, she's saying things like reform of the IMF, international financial system reform, more money for money laundering and international anti-terror activities, all of that she's calling for and asking the House Financial Services Committee to approve. And in summary, she says that the US has avoided a damaging default, avoided a crisis, managed to stave that off, is sanctioning Russia while supporting Ukraine, improving its image abroad, and also its priority now is a strong economy here domestically at home. That's what she's been saying.
John, thanks for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Who's going to regulate artificial intelligence? The European Union is debating that question and is set to agree landmark legislation to establish controls on how AI can be used. The EU is concerned the new technology could pose a real threat unless regulated. Our correspondent Mark Webster is in Brussels. Good to see you, Mark. So what is the EU proposing in this AI Act that they're debating?
Well, what the Commission and the European Parliament want to try and achieve is what they say is a more human-centric set of rules and regulations to regulate the future developments in artificial intelligence. Now, that means they've got to make a very clear distinction between the sorts of techniques that you can have on one side, which the United Nations Secretary General has described as an existential threat to mankind along the lines of nuclear war. But at the same time, you don't want to stifle developments which have been already very beneficial in areas like medicine, like education. So that's the fine line that they're trying to walk. It's not going to be an easy act to pull off, as I explain in this report. It's the dizzying speed with which artificial intelligence systems are evolving that has alarmed the authorities here in Brussels. The EU believes that there is an urgent need for a legal framework which would identify those areas which pose a real threat to people's health, safety or fundamental rights. However, critics of the legislation say the problem with some computer technology is that it's changing so fast any laws would be out of date by the time they're agreed. The AI Act proposes to classify AI systems based on their level of risk, ranging from low to unacceptable. This will in turn mean companies will have different levels of legal responsibilities. Unacceptable AI tools will be banned, where high-risk AI, like the kind used in critical infrastructure, law enforcement and education, will probably be required to conduct risk assessments, log their activities and make data available to authorities to scrutinise. Others argue that establishing a benchmark for responsibly operated AI will reassure the public and ensure a degree of quality control.
I think companies will have to. I think it's, in a way, it's a bit like a lot of people would not go to a restaurant that hasn't passed health code. In the future, I believe that will be the same with artificial intelligence. You'll see that people are not going to go to a company that hasn't passed the conformity assessment.
It has been the remarkably speedy development of systems like ChatGPT which has galvanised lawmakers here. Its computer programs can already answer questions plausibly, write essays, summaries and stories which sound natural and can even generate computer code. The United Nations chief has warned that an international body is needed to regulate the fast-changing technology.
New technology is moving at warp speed, and so are the threats that come with it. Alarm bells over the latest form of artificial intelligence, generative AI, are deafening.
While the majority of MEPs are thought likely to back the legislation, there has been the usual behind-the-scenes haggling about the details. Some are unhappy about the use of facial recognition software in public places, while other parties want to make sure that it's still available for the investigation of serious crimes. The Parliament is expected to vote on the issue later this week, but given the pace of technological change, experts say the legislation will have to be revisited in the future.
Well, Mark, it's all very well the EU wanting to come up with some AI regulation, but how's it going to work if other parts of the world aren't doing it too? Doesn't this need to be joined up, or is there a risk of everyone treading on each other's toes?
Well, that's a very good point, Juliette. Yes, what is happening is broadly on two levels. You're seeing at national level all of the big players, China, the United States, the EU, all looking at their domestic arrangements to see what they can put in place, which does at least regulate the industry, but doesn't prevent their own economies from developing additional applications. So, for instance, China's already said that it wants to come up with an alternative to ChatGPT. But at the same time, just as you're suggesting, you've got to have a second, more global level. And what's interesting here is that the United Nations is saying, look, if member states want it, what we could do is set up a global organisation, rather like the one that currently regulates the nuclear industry. And that would then look at possible infringements of what is generally considered safe development of AI. It would obviously look for rogue players and make sure that nothing was going wrong there. But I think critically here too, what the United Nations is suggesting is they do not want the tech industry to be the leader in this game. They believe the tech industry would do anything that is possible, not what is sensible.
Mark Webster in Brussels, thank you very much for that update.
Well, AI isn't all about risk and threats. Artificial intelligence will be helping the Beatles to say hello, goodbye for the final time this year.
So Paul McCartney told the BBC that a demo tape featuring the voice of John Lennon has been enhanced by the technology to overcome poor sound quality and, in his words, make John's voice pure again. The Fab Four split in 1970. Sporadic recordings have appeared since then, including 2 new songs in the mid-1990s. McCartney says that the new song will be the band's last ever release.
Apple will soon be changing the design of the charging sockets in its iPhones, tablets and laptops. The tech giant has been forced into the move by new EU legislation requiring all cables to follow the same standard to cut down on electronic waste.
Well, campaigners have welcomed the law, but say it's only a first step. Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger reports.
At the Vienna DRZ recycling center, Wojciech Mroz dismantles cables to separate metals from plastics.
What we need is inside the cables, copper. That's what makes the most money.
While copper is reused and sold for $8 per kilogram, the plastic mantle is often not recycled but incinerated. This is why the EU wants to tackle the e-waste problem at the source by establishing one standard charging cable for all phones, which will stop Apple using its iPhone Lightning connector in the block.
The European Union says a unified charging cable will reduce e-waste and empower consumers to make more sustainable choices. Apple, on the other side, says strict regulation mandating just one type of connector stifles innovation rather than encouraging it.
According to UN data, European households own an average 74 electronic products, 13 of which are lying unused in drawers and closets.
I have boxes in boxes with different cables from all the phones I have for like the last 15 years.
We just need one cable, like USB-C. No micro USB, no mini USB, no lightning.
No, we just changed everything to Apple, so it's not a big problem.
If there is one standardized cable, there will be less waste.
The EU must go further than only regulating chargers, says Stefan Saalhofer from the Institute of Waste Management at Vienna's Boku University. The professor calls for less hazardous elements in electronics, as flame retardants in the cable's plastic mantle cause difficulties during the recycling process.
First, it needs to identify those flame retardants. Some of them are toxic, then this needs further separation.
Due to this complex process, only a few cables are completely recycled. While the EU's standard phone charger regulation comes into force by the end of next year, rumors say Apple might bypass the law by introducing a Lightning-like authenticator chip in its USB-C cables, potentially limiting the functionality with Apple unapproved accessories. So in the end, we might have to use multiple cables nevertheless. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Vienna.
Chinese-made EV cars are expected to capture 15% of Europe's market by the year 2025. So says KPMG. The prediction comes as brands such as BYD, NIO and Li Auto have been gaining in popularity among European consumers. Well, let's talk to Jim Holder, one of the UK's top experts in the motor industry. Jim, welcome back. Good to see you. KPMG's report says China's car makers capturing around 15% of Europe's market by 2025. I mean, that's an extraordinary figure. How so?
Absolutely, it would be an extraordinary figure, and they've got a long way to go, but there's no question they're coming quickly. They've built huge markets back home in their domestic market that's generating huge profits that they're now looking to invest in global expansion. They started early with electric cars in China. They invested heavily in the technology. They have, in some instances, quite efficient batteries available at quite impressive prices, and that seems to be winning over at least a tranche of consumers over in Europe.
I think last year Chinese electric cars accounted for less than, I think it was 10% of the 1.1 million battery electric vehicles sold in Europe. So what's behind this anticipated surge in demand for Chinese EVs?
Absolutely. Europe has set a course towards electric vehicles only by 2030 and another step in 2035. So we know that 100% of our vehicle sales have to be electric cars by a set date. And of course, all the car makers are scrambling to take a part of that market. As I said, China moved early on electric vehicles. It has some advantages around the technology and the price that can offer that technology at. The disadvantages, of course, around the brand awareness and some perceptions that need to be overcome, perhaps. But they are coming hard, and they have the hardware to try and win us over.
Jim, I'm so old. I remember the onslaught of the Japanese cars coming into Europe in the 1980s and the ambivalence, if I can put it like that, among consumers then. I mean, is this going to be the same kind of thing? I wonder if Europe is worried, or rather European automakers are worried about the threat of the Chinese products coming in.
They absolutely should be. I think the key point here that I keep coming back to is the price that some of these vehicles are being offered at. I think there are high-performance electric vehicles where the Chinese are targeting, and they are making some inroads, but I think the real fear for the European manufacturers is the mass-market brands that are coming. They are slightly more affordable, slightly better in some cases with some of the technology they're offering, and that really threatens to bust through the sort of preconceived and preset expectations of the market. We know that electric vehicle buyers are much less brand loyal from all of our studies than combustion engine buyers. They are starting from scratch, building up their knowledge base, and that does give these Chinese brands an opportunity, at least, to try and establish their credentials into the market.
It is being reported that Chinese car makers are holding talks with the UK about manufacturing in Britain. I mean, I wonder how significant is that, and what does that mean in real terms for the UK car industry?
It would be hugely significant. Any investment in manufacturing in the UK would really buck the trend at the moment. We've seen some factory closures, some job cuts, and more in the UK in recent years around the car industry. We have been slow as a nation to invest in battery manufacturing, which is an absolutely critical part of building EVs and also critical for avoiding tariffs in future with our biggest export market for the car industry, the EU, but also potentially with America and other countries. So we've got huge hurdles to overcome, really, to build up our EV infrastructure in the UK. And I think any investment by any manufacturer as a result would be slightly a surprise, but also massively significant.
You lead me neatly on to ask you about Toyota, who've announced their strategic pivot, if I can put it like that, towards EV, introducing high-performance solid-state batteries and other new technologies. I mean, what does that mean for Toyota in such a competitive market?
Absolutely. Toyota, the world's largest car maker and car seller, but it has been slow to getting its battery electric vehicles on sale. It would argue it's been slow for very good reason, that the technology hasn't been good enough to date to offer the kind of experience that Toyota believes its owners and buyers would expect from them. Solid-state batteries are next generation technology. They have been in the industry for 5 years or more, the holy grail for the next step. You know, more power into a smaller density, so lighter weight, but can give you more distance to drive, potentially also for a lower cost. I would expect these batteries to be used on higher-end vehicles initially, but to then drip feed into the mass market. And if Toyota is saying it can get them right, then that is a huge, huge breakthrough, because we know that its quality standards are up there with the very best in the world. This is something all car makers have been chasing, and Toyota appears to have an advantage.
Jim, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the programme again. Jim Holder, the motor industry expert.
Manchester United shares are up 8% over speculation that a deal has been reached to sell the club.
Reports suggest a fifth bid from Sheikh Jassim, chairman of Qatar Islamic Bank, has been successful after it was raised to around $6.5 billion. Pure speculation, says his team. The Premier League club is expected to make a formal announcement this week.
The US Senate has opened an investigation into the partnership between golf's PGA Tour and the Saudi-funded LIV Golf. The two leagues had been involved in the legal battle but announced a shock merger last week. The Senate has requested details of the agreement. Several players were criticised for joining LIV Golf due to Saudi Arabia's alleged human rights abuses.
Regulators in the United States have gone to court in a bid to block Microsoft's purchase of the video game maker Activision Blizzard. The Federal Trade Commission says the $69 billion deal would damage competition in the sector. The planned purchase of the Call of Duty publisher has already been blocked by UK regulators, but approved by the EU.
China's central bank has lowered a short-term lending rate for the first time in 10 months as it seeks to help restore market confidence. It could signal possible easing for longer-term rates as demand and investor sentiment weakens. The central bank hopes to prop up the stalling post-pandemic recovery in the world's second-largest economy.
The UK government's borrowing costs are up to levels even higher than those seen after the former Prime Minister Liz Truss's disastrous budget spooked the markets. The rate rose on latest jobs figures, which showed regular pay growing at the fastest rate on record. Expectations are the Bank of England will now have to keep raising interest rates.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching Still Ahead. Sex, money and a rotten deal at work. A United Nations report says gender equality has gone into reverse.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, in the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top stories. A major police operation in England. 2 university students among 3 people killed in Nottingham in a knife and van attack. The police arrest a man on suspicion of murder.
And former US President Donald Trump to appear in court charged with keeping White House documents related to nuclear, military and intelligence secrets.
The Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has arrived in China for his state visit. This comes after Beijing said it's ready to help facilitate peace talks in the Middle East. Our correspondent Feng Yilei reports.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas arrived in Beijing on Tuesday morning, commencing his state visit that will last until Friday. This is just one of Abbas' multiple visits to China and makes him the first Arab head of state to be received by China this year. Experts predict bilateral discussions will likely focus on regional peace and security. Prior to the meeting, Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang held talks with his Palestinian counterpart Riyad al-Maliki on Tuesday afternoon. And Qin Gang said the Middle East is currently undergoing profound changes and that it is crucial to strengthen strategic independence, promote unity and foster cooperation. And he reiterated China's commitment to supporting peace talks and contributing to the resolution of the Palestinian issue. Well, in response, al-Maliki said he highly appreciates President Xi's initiatives on the Palestinian issue and thanked China for its strong support of Palestine on the country's politics and development. Abbas' visit to China follows President Xi's visit to Saudi Arabia when he met with Abbas and pledged to work toward an early, just and durable solution to the Palestinian question. And President Xi has consistently proposed China's resolutions for addressing the Palestinian issue, advocating for a political settlement based on a two-state solution. Given that the Palestinian issue lies at the heart of Middle East politics and significantly affects regional peace, stability, equity, and justice, President Abbas' visit holds great importance not only for China and Palestine but also for the Arab world. And it's worth noting that peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine have stalled since 2014. Attention will be focused on China's role in the Palestine-Israel issue after it recently mediated the reconciliation between fierce rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran. Feng Yilei, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, Frank Lowenstein was the US Special Envoy for Middle East Peace under President Barack Obama. I asked him about the significance of this visit.
On the one hand, I don't think it's especially significant in the sense that it's, I think, Abbas's fifth state visit to China. China has long suggested they have an interest in helping to resolve this conflict. They've offered host conferences. They've put forth various peace plans. So I think on that count, it's more or less business as usual. But the context is different than it's been in the past, and I think that's what makes this significant. China's obviously looking to play a greater role in the Middle East. I think they see an opportunity here, building on the China, their role in the Iran, Saudi Arabia rapprochement to really increase their profile and visibility in the region. I think it's a good message for them to be on the side of the Palestinians for that purpose. So I can see what is in it for China, what's significant from China's end. And I think for the Palestinians, it's suggestive of the fact that they really don't have a lot of hope in the United States or in the conventional modes of trying to resolve the conflict that I was involved in under President Obama. So, yeah, the substance is more or less the same, but the context is different.
What would a good outcome or a good agreement look like arising from this visit?
So I think the most likely outcome is a strong statement of support coming from President Xi and from the Chinese leadership. I think that would be very valuable to the Palestinians. I think they're looking to broaden out their base of support. Abbas was visiting with President Putin in October, and I think they're looking to the global south and some of the other countries who are non-traditional players in this conflict to provide them the support that they don't believe that they're getting from the United States and from the West as much as they would like to have. And so I think on that count, there's opportunities for President Abbas to bring more allies to the table. In terms of outcomes, though, I would be very surprised if anything emerged with respect to the peace process itself. I think you might see greater assistance from the Chinese to the Palestinians. They only give $2 or $3 million a year, which is relatively low. I think you may see some agreements with respect to trade. I know the Belt and Road Initiative is something the Chinese are trying to advance whenever possible. So I would think statements, trade agreements, expressions of support for building infrastructure and that kind of thing, those would be the most likely outcomes from this, rather than anything directly related to the peace process.
And I wonder to what extent do China's expanding economic interests in the Middle East, particularly its focus on energy resources and so on, shape its political engagement and influence in the Middle East?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge part of it. And I think that their relationship with Saudi Arabia is very much indicative of that. And I think that's really where you might find the most direct tie-in to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Saudi Arabia normalization with Israel is obviously a big priority for the United States. It's a big priority for Israel. And to the extent to which the Chinese can be on the side of the Palestinians, they can use their influence with the Saudi Arabians to make sure that Saudi keeps the Palestinian conflict front of mind when they're talking about a normalization with Israel. I think that would be probably an objective that President Abbas would have that would fit very much with what the Chinese are trying to achieve in the region.
China's premier has met the president of Honduras in Beijing. The two governments have signed a memorandum of understanding as Honduras prepares to join China's Belt and Road Initiative, the multi-billion-dollar global infrastructure program. The two countries have also agreed to strengthen economic cooperation, with Beijing approving the import of Honduran bananas and coffee beans.
India's western state of Gujarat and southern parts of Pakistan are bracing for Cyclone Biparjoy, expected to make landfall later this week. Classified as a severe cyclonic storm, it's expected to land between Gujarat and Karachi with wind speeds of up to 150 kilometers per hour. Fishing boats have been called to shore and oil companies told to move offshore rig workers to safety. Efforts to move 80,000 people in Pakistan are now underway.
Japan's Prime Minister has announced measures to boost the country's dwindling birth rate. Fumio Kishida says the economy is in danger due to its ageing population. The government aims to double overall spending on childcare by 2030, with increased payouts to families with children and more flexible working. The announcement has fueled speculation of a general election.
The custody battle has broken out over the 4 children who survived for 40 days alone in the Amazon rainforests following their plane crash. The children's maternal grandparents want to care for their children after their mother died in the crash. However, the father of the 2 youngest children, who's facing accusations of domestic violence, also wants custody. Colombian authorities say they're talking to all sides to try to decide who should take care of them.
The Golden Globe Awards has been sold off. The takeover will see the shutdown of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, whose members decided which films and television shows to award. It comes after the association faced allegations of corruption and racism, which led to a boycott last year. The new owners say they'll continue to manage the show's broadcasts and focus on expanding the audience.
Gender equality has gone into reverse, so says a new report by the United Nations, which contains some rather stark findings.
Half of people in 80 countries believe men make better political leaders. 40% believe men are better business executives. And alarmingly, a quarter think it's justified for men to beat their wives. Well, Raquel Lagunas is Global Director of Gender Equality at the United Nations Development Programme.
Let's address the positive aspect of what we are saying in the report is also that social norms are not written in stone. It's very much up to us. It can change, and it already have been evolving, right? So there are different ways of addressing this problem. What really is something that we found out and is very interesting is that many times we make assumptions, like, for instance, if we invest in education, women will access to the labor market. It is proven that we made great progress in women's access into education, but the numbers, the statistics on women's access into the labor market, formal economy, are stacked for the last, 20 years. So this is helping all of us. It needs to help all of us and governments to realize that there is this component, this dimension of social norms, values, belief systems of societies that are influencing and shaping the access to, for instance, access to jobs, or are influencing the physical integrity of half of the population of countries. So it's a very relevant finding. So when we develop, for instance, governments develop labor policies, they need to include, yes, a component on social norms change.
So is it improbable or impossible to achieve gender equality? If not by 2030, then even in our lifetimes?
It is possible. It should be possible. And this report that it has been, first of all, shocking for us, is just giving the clues on the way forward, on what do we need to do to make progress and to accelerate. And traditionally, these kind of values or perceptions or belief systems were pretty intangible and invisible. So the fact that now we know how this is working in the context of the gender inequality is just giving us the hopes that if we address and we target through policies and other entry points, that social norms change. It can happen, it should happen, because gender social norms and values are not written in stone. So at the same time, it gives us more information and clues on the solutions that we are looking forward.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Going, Going, Gone. A rare 12th century Chinese Buddha goes under the hammer in Paris, fetching much more than expected.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Manchester is home to the second largest Chinatown in the UK after London.
The first Chinese immigrants settled there in the 19th century, and now their stories are being told in the first permanent gallery devoted to Chinese culture in the city's museum. CGTN's correspondent Li Zhuanghua has been to visit.
Tucked away in the University of Manchester, a newly opened exhibition has piqued the interest of Sinophiles. Started with a donation from British-Chinese businessman Li Kai-hong a few years ago, the exhibition now showcases rarely displayed collections of Chinese origin, ranging from a scroll that shows a detailed and vivid picture of how Beijing residents celebrated Emperor Kangshi's 60th birthday in 1713, to antique Chinese furniture and traditional medicine. The curator says the aim is to boost the British understanding of China.
We felt it was really, really important to do that by creating a sense of empathy within the visitor. So typically to give them a sense of what it might be like to see things through the eyes of a person from another community, or to stand in the shoes of someone else.
Brian explains the other objective of the museum is to help descendants of Chinese origin understand their forefathers' history. Chinese immigrants first came to Manchester in the mid-19th century before coming in larger numbers in the 1940s. Many Chinese who arrived in Manchester back then were farmers, and one of the very few things they could manage to do was cooking, and gradually there were more Chinese gathering here, and this area was not called Chinatown Manchester until the 1970s. It was about then that Jerry Yon relocated to the city with his father, a dim sum chef, and started their family business.
I suppose up to about the 50s and 60s, UK is a relatively homogeneous nation. But I think Chinese added to that diversity.
Jerry didn't stop at the food catering business. His economic and social contribution to his adopted country had him appointed as Deputy Lieutenant of Greater Manchester in 2008.
In addition to food and catering, import and export, and the second generation moving into all sorts of professions, being an accountant, lawyers and doctors, you're now seeing people doing logistics, and people investing in UK companies. So I think that the contribution of the Chinese in this country is been growing in the last 50 years.
He hopes the younger generation of Chinese immigrants can serve as a bridge between the two communities, just like the fusion food he provides. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Manchester.
It was once thought to be lost to history. Now a rare Buddha statue from 12th century China has sold in Paris for $2.2 million.
The family who owned it for generations have been unaware of its significance or its value. Our correspondent Natalie Melhouse reports.
This impressive wood figure represents a male deity, seated in a contemplative pose with an omnipresent glass gaze. It dates back to the 12th century Jin dynasty and is surprisingly still largely intact.
Today what we see is only the remains of something that was much more impressive, but you still see the detailing, and it is very, very rare for a figure of this size to survive. And what makes it so special is that it's more or less complete. It has the head, the torso, and the head is one piece. You can still get a sense of the magnificence of this whole group of figures that were, at some point, in a temple.
It was once part of an elaborate 38-piece collection, originally made to adorn important Buddhist temples in northern China.
For us and for the collectors and for Chinese people, even if they're not collectors of wood figures, this is a very important figure because it's compassionate. And you can see when you look at the face, it's a benevolent face, it's a kind face, and it's called the Bodhisattva of compassion because he looks down and he listens to people suffering, and you can really sense it, you get an idea of it. So it's quite remarkable that it has survived and is still here after all these years.
The relic made its way back onto the market last year, after a French family offered to give up the historic heirloom that's been passed down through the generations since 1935. They were unaware of the sculpture's value.
It was always in a prominent position, but it was not in a place where people knew what they had. They did not know what it was. It was special, but they didn't know exactly. It was Chinese, Asian. So in a way, to find out from this ad that actually there was a value, a commercial value to a piece like this, and to find out how early it was because it had a date, that was the biggest surprise, I think, for them.
There's been a great deal of interest in the statue, with experts saying there are only a handful of similar pieces left, mostly owned by museums. Bidders joined the Paris auction from all across the world, with some even pitching in online. After a fierce contest, the sale was locked in at over $2 million. The statue's destination remains a mystery for now, but some believe it was probably snapped up by a buyer looking to take it back home to China. Natalie Melhouse, CGTN, Paris.
The headlines again. A major police operation in England. 2 university students among 3 people killed in Nottingham in a knife and van attack. Police arrest a man on suspicion of murder.
Former US President Donald Trump is to appear in court, charged with keeping White House documents relating to nuclear, military and intelligence secrets.
And inflation in the United States, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, falls to 4%. That's the lowest rate in 2 years.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.